They were daughters of Denmark, born into a proud Jewish household. But what they were about to reveal would shatter every expectation. In the heart of Denmark, a nation where Islam was once a distant concept, scarcely woven into the fabric of everyday life, an unexpected event sent ripples across the societal landscape. The revelation that 3 Jewish sisters had embraced Islam wasn't merely a private transformation. It became a seismic shift that defied long-held traditions and left an entire community in collective disbelief. Julia, the eldest of the trio, stood quietly in the living room of her family's home, her pulse echoing like a drumbeat in her chest. Today, she would reveal something that had irrevocably altered the course of her life. The air in the room was dense with tension. Her father sat upright in his chair, his posture rigid and authoritative. Her mother lingered near the kitchen, ostensibly busy, yet her ears were undeniably attuned to every word about to be spoken. Summoning a deep breath to steady her nerves, Julia voiced the words that would fracture the life they all once knew. "I have accepted Islam as my faith," she said, her voice trembling yet unmistakably resolute. The statement landed like a thunderclap. Her father's face immediately darkened. Rising from his seat, his stature now towering with disbelief and fury, he thundered, "What did you just say?" His voice crackled with a rage she had never seen before. Julia's hands quivered, but she stood her ground. "I believe in one God, Allah. I have embraced Islam because it holds the truth I've spent my life searching for." The response was immediate and violent. Her father's hand lashed across her face, the sharp sound echoing through the stillness of the room. "How dare you?" he bellowed, his complexion flushed with indignation. "You have disgraced this family. How can you turn your back on everything we taught you?" Her cheek stung, but Julia didn't flinch. "I haven't abandoned the truth," she replied softly. "I finally found it. Islam has given me peace, something I never truly experienced before." His voice, hoarse now with disbelief, came out cold and bitter. "If you don't renounce this madness, you will lose everything. Your inheritance, your place in this family. Do you understand?" Julia locked eyes with him, her gaze unwavering. "I understand," she said, "but my soul is not for sale. I will not renounce my faith." A suffocating silence enveloped the room. But then a second voice emerged, steady, calm, but every bit as defiant. It was Sarah, Julia's younger sister. A modest scarf cloaked her head, a quiet yet unshakable statement of belief. Their father's jaw clenched in disbelief as he turned toward her. "It won't change anything," Sarah said, her voice measured but unwavering. "Because I, too, have embraced Islam." The silence thickened into something unbearable. Their father staggered backward as though the weight of her words had struck him physically. "Not you too," he whispered, his voice cracking under the strain. "This cannot be happening." But it was. Sarah stepped forward, her resolve unwavering. "I believe in the same God as Julia, and I will not hide it." His fury returned in full force. "Both of you," he spat, "have brought shame upon this family. You are dead to me. Do you hear me? Dead." His words were a knife to the chest. Their mother, who had remained a silent observer until now, broke down in anguish. Tears streamed down her cheeks. "How could you do this to us?" she cried. "We raised you to honor our traditions, our values. What has come over you?" Julia's expression softened, but the conviction burning in her remained unshaken. "Mama, this isn't about disrespect," she said gently. "This is about truth. Islam opened my heart in ways I never imagined. This is not a rejection of you. It's the fulfillment of a spiritual hunger I never knew I had." Their mother turned away as though unable to bear the sight of her daughters. The weight of what she saw as betrayal was too heavy to carry, yet the turmoil refused to remain within their home. Within days, whispers morphed into wild speculation, spreading like wildfire throughout the community. Then the media took hold of the story. News headlines screamed across Denmark, "3 Jewish sisters convert to Islam, a nation in shock." The public response was immediate and deeply polarized. Social media exploded. Some hailed the young women as brave pioneers, bold enough to challenge societal norms. Others condemned them as brainwashed or rebellious, manipulated into abandoning their identity. The trio, Julia, Sarah, and Leah, their childhood friend who had joined them in embracing Islam, suddenly found themselves under an unforgiving spotlight. The scrutiny was relentless. Yet they weathered the storm, bound not only by sisterhood and friendship, but now by shared faith. One night, in the modest confines of Julia's bedroom, Leah broke the silence. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly, her voice laced with vulnerability. Julia didn't hesitate. Number faith isn't about public approval. It's about what feels real, what resonates in your soul. This is my truth. Sarah nodded. "It's not easy," she acknowledged, "but nothing worth having ever is. We chose this path, and we'll walk it, no matter the cost." Despite the hardship, the trio discovered comfort in their connection, to each other, to their faith, and to the strength it cultivated within them. What had once been a casual friendship and sisterly bond evolved into something sacred, companionship in faith, united by courage. But the storm was far from over. Their father's fury had not been theatrical. It had been real. "You are no longer my daughters," he had said with the frigid finality of a winter wind. And he meant it. True to his threat, he ordered them out. No goodbye, no compromise, no reconciliation. It was as though they had ceased to exist. They packed their belongings in silence. The rooms they once knew now felt foreign. Sarah's fingers trembled as she folded her clothing. Julia's face remained stoic, though grief churned beneath her calm exterior. They weren't afraid. They were grieving, mourning the family they'd lost, the home they'd been exiled from. Leah, having found inspiration in their bravery, chose to walk beside them. She, too, left her old life behind. The 3 women moved into a stark apartment on the outskirts of the city. The rooms were barren, the winter wind seeping through thin walls. But even in this desolate place, their faith wrapped around them like a warm shawl. That first night they prayed together. Their voices, soft but resolute, filled the room with sacred verses. The spiritual warmth far exceeded what any heater could provide, but piety did not pay rent or put food on the table. In the days that followed, their resolve was tested. Financial support cut off, they each took what jobs they could. Julia worked pre-dawn hours at a bakery. Sarah cleaned offices in silence. Leah babysat children, trying to help keep their new life afloat. There were nights they went to bed hungry, torn between paying rent or buying groceries. But their faith never faltered. One evening, as they shared a humble meal, a knock at the door startled them. Julia opened it to find a local reporter, microphone in hand, eyes gleaming. Their story had reached the nation's conscience. The questions began. "Why did you convert to Islam?" the reporter asked skeptically. "Was it because of a Muslim friend? A romantic relationship?" Julia bristled. Her voice was cool but firm. "No one influenced us. We chose Islam through reflection, reading, and soul-searching. It was not a decision born of coercion, but of clarity." Still unconvinced, the reporter pressed on. "Then what led you here?" Julia paused, then spoke candidly. "A few months ago, Denmark was gripped by anti-Muslim protests. The hate was visceral. I joined the crowd, convinced Muslims were dangerous, our enemy. But their response stunned me. They didn't meet hate with hate. They stood firm, with dignity." She swallowed hard, emotion thickening her voice. "It made me question everything. Their strength didn't come from numbers or wealth. It came from belief. I needed to understand it. And when I did, I found peace." Sarah and Leah nodded, their eyes reflecting the journey they had all taken, from skepticism to faith, from fear to truth. Their story wasn't over. It was just beginning, but not for the reasons you might assume. I began reading the Quran not to genuinely understand it, but to uncover flaws. I wanted to justify my biases. She paused, exhaling slowly. But the deeper I delved, the clearer it became how utterly mistaken I had been. The Quran wasn't merely a religious manuscript. It was a manual for life, brimming with insight and mercy. It resonated with my soul in a way nothing ever had. Leah, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke, her voice gentle but unwavering. It wasn't a simple path, she confessed. We had to face everything we had been taught, to challenge the very roots of our upbringing. But ultimately, the truth was irrefutable. Islam gave us serenity, clarity, and a sense of direction. The reporter's pen hovered above her notepad. She studied them closely before posing her next question. "And how did your families respond?" The inquiry lingered in the air. Julia took a breath, carefully choosing her words. "It's not something that can be easily summed up," she began, her voice tinged with both sorrow and resolve. "But our families, they made their stance painfully clear, and in turn, we made ours." The reporter opened her mouth to speak again, but Julia's expression softened. Her words slowed, signaling that what came next was far more profound. The camera zoomed in as Julia adjusted her scarf, her face a blend of quiet resilience and exposed vulnerability. The reporter leaned in, sensing the true essence of Julia's journey was just beginning. Taking another breath, Julia continued. "I was raised in a Jewish household where religion wasn't simply belief, it was identity," she explained. "From a young age, I was taught to view Muslims as adversaries. They were depicted as violent, repressive, and backwards, everything we were not." She paused, her gaze distant, as if recalling those early impressions. "It was drilled into me, through narratives, religious talks, and the everyday dialogue surrounding our lives." A shadow crossed her face as she added, "But my rebellion started early. By the time I was a teenager, I was already resisting everything my parents tried to pass on. I immersed myself in distractions, parties, shallow relationships, anything to numb the growing emptiness." She hesitated before revealing more. "Drugs became my escape. I thought that dressing provocatively would make me feel powerful, that attention would fill the void inside me, but it only left me feeling more hollow." Her voice lowered slightly, though her conviction remained solid. "And that's where my real journey began." The room fell still, the gravity of her words suspended in the air. The interview was far from over. Julia's narrative had only just begun. Seated beside her, Sarah spoke gently. "We both lived that way for years. At first, it felt like freedom, like we were in control. But in truth, it was a trap. The more we sought approval, the more lost we felt." Julia nodded in agreement. Then came the protests. Her expression hardened as she recalled the events. Denmark erupted after a sacred item of the Muslim community was desecrated. Outraged, Muslims flooded the streets to protest. And I was livid. How dare they disrupt our lives for their beliefs? Their actions made me miss an important exam, and that fury consumed me. The bitterness in her voice was unmistakable. I joined the counter-protest, determined to silence them. I screamed chants, waved signs, and felt righteous in my rage. But then something unexpected happened. As I stood there, hurling insults, I noticed something peculiar. The Muslims across from us. They didn't retaliate with hatred. They didn't lash out. Instead, they stood their ground, resolute. It wasn't defiance, it was belief. And that unsettled me. The reporter leaned forward. "Was that the moment you began to question everything?" Julia paused, then shook her head. "Not quite. It planted a seed, but I wasn't ready to face it yet. What truly shook me occurred a few days later. She inhaled deeply, steadying herself. I was in a cafe when I overheard two Muslim women speaking. Despite everything, one of them said she prayed for those who despised her. She said, "Hate only harms the one who carries it. I pray that their hearts find peace." The room was silent as Julia's voice trembled. I couldn't forget those words. Who prays for their enemies? What kind of faith fosters that kind of grace? Sarah continued where Julia paused. That's when we chose to read the Quran, not out of a desire for truth, but from pride. We wanted to confirm our biases, to find contradictions that would justify our resentment. Julia's voice grew more assured, but the further we read, the more our defenses collapsed. The Quran wasn't just sacred, it was profound, rational, overflowing with mercy. It answered questions I didn't even know I had. It didn't confront me with threats. It challenged me with knowledge. She paused, then recited a verse that had pierced her soul. And, "We have certainly made the Quran easy for remembrance. So is there anyone who will remember?" Her voice softened. It felt like it was speaking directly to me. The reporter leaned in. "Can you recall a moment when everything changed?" Julia's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "Yes. One night I was alone, overwhelmed by everything I was learning. I asked myself if I had the courage to truly follow my heart. In that moment, I opened the Quran at random. The first verse I saw read, 'Indeed, those who have believed and whose hearts are assured by the remembrance of Allah. Unquestionably, by the remembrance of Allah, hearts are assured.'" Her voice cracked. I felt a profound sense of peace. A burden I hadn't realized I was carrying suddenly lifted. Leah offered her perspective. For me, it was realizing that Islam wasn't just belief, it was a call to action. It demanded responsibility, purpose. It brought a focus I had never experienced before. The room seemed suspended, holding the weight of every word. The reporter's pen paused again. "How did your families respond once they knew?" Julia's expression darkened. They were devastated. My father felt betrayed. My mother, shattered. Our community saw it as a rejection of everything we stood for. But it wasn't about rejecting them. It was about embracing the truth I had discovered. Sarah gently took Julia's hand. We never meant to hurt anyone," she said, "but we couldn't ignore what we had found. Islam wasn't just a religion. It was a lifeline, a beacon of hope." Julia exhaled slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. The hardest part was knowing my decision meant losing the people I cherished most. The silence that followed said everything. "I loved them more than anything," Julia admitted. "But to live honestly, I had to follow what I knew was right. And Islam gave me the courage to do that." The reporter's tone softened, her admiration clear. "Your story is extraordinary. What would you say to others questioning their beliefs?" Julia offered a faint, knowing smile. "I'd say this: don't fear your doubts. Don't shy away from seeking the truth, even if it takes you down unfamiliar roads. Faith isn't blind obedience. It's comprehension." She breathed in deeply before continuing. "For me, that truth was Islam. For someone else, it may look different. But what matters most is having the bravery to search." The camera lingered as her final words echoed. The room was still, but this was far from the end. In Denmark, where the Jewish community lived in tight-knit seclusion, Islam had always been distant. There were no mosques in town, no Muslim neighbors, no real exposure to that faith. Islam had been a foreign concept, mentioned in passing, often distorted, rarely understood. No one in their circle had ever even met a Muslim, let alone engaged with their beliefs. For Julia, Sarah, and Leah, their journey to Islam began in the most unexpected way: online. In a world where information was just a click away, curiosity led them down a path they never imagined. The protests and the unshaken dignity of the Muslim community had sparked a question. What was it about this faith that gave its followers such inner power? At first, their exploration was cautious. They read blogs, watched documentaries, conducted quiet research, still wary of what they were uncovering. But the more they learned, the more they realized how little they truly knew. They downloaded Islamic texts, purchased translations of the Quran, and began to study it sincerely. It was like opening a window, Julia remembered, letting in light where there had only been shadow. They initially approached it critically, comparing Islamic beliefs with their own, expecting inconsistencies. But instead of disproving Islam, they found themselves captivated by its core. The Quran's messages of unity, compassion, and accountability stirred something deep inside. It wasn't just theology, Sarah whispered. It was a way of life, a blueprint for peace. One night, huddled in Julia's room, the truth became impossible to deny. "Do you feel it too?" Leah asked softly, her voice barely audible. "That pull? That certainty?" Sarah's eyes welled with tears. "Yes. It feels like my heart is finally at peace," she confessed. "But it's terrifying. What will our families say? Our community? Can we really do this?" Julia exhaled deeply, her heart racing with a blend of fear and conviction. "I don't know what the future holds," she admitted, "but I know one thing. I can't go back. Not after this. I believe in Allah. I believe this is the truth." That moment transformed everything. The very next day, they quietly embraced Islam. Nobody in their community was aware, yet their lives had already begun to evolve. They ceased participating in rituals they no longer believed in. They stepped away from customs that contradicted their newfound faith. Slowly, they began molding their lives around the principles of Islam. Letting go of old habits, age-old traditions, and even cherished relationships felt like peeling away layers of their identity. It was painful, but vital. The first visible change was in their appearance. Choosing to dress modestly and don the hijab wasn't a superficial decision. It symbolized the internal shift they had experienced. It wasn't just about fabric or fashion. It was an external reflection of a deeply personal transformation. But in their close-knit community, change didn't slip by unnoticed. The questions came swiftly. "Why are you dressed like that? Have you joined some kind of cult?" Whispers quickly gave way to confrontations. Eventually, their families could no longer ignore the shift, and the truth had to come out. When they finally revealed their conversion, the backlash was immediate and harsh. Julia winced, recalling the fury in her father's voice. "You've been brainwashed," he bellowed, his face red with fury. "Do you even grasp what you're doing? You're throwing away everything we built, everything we stand for." Her mother's reaction was quieter, yet no less crushing. She looked at Julia, eyes brimming with unshed tears, and whispered, "How could you do this to us?" "To our family?" Her mother's voice quivered with sorrow. Her expression was one of heartbreak. "Don't you see how much pain you're causing?" Sarah tried to answer, her voice trembling. "Mama, this isn't about rejecting you. It's about embracing what we've come to know as truth. We still love you. We're still your daughters." But their words fell flat. The more they tried to explain, the more their parents interpreted their faith as betrayal. No matter how softly they spoke, no matter how desperately they tried to reassure them, nothing could bridge the widening divide. Then came the ultimatum. "You have a choice," their father declared, his voice cold and unwavering. "Abandon Islam, or leave this house." Silence fell, heavy, suffocating. It was the most agonizing decision they had ever faced. But deep down, their hearts already knew the answer. With sorrow anchoring their steps, they packed their bags, leaving behind the only home they had ever known. Starting over wasn't easy. They moved into a cramped apartment on the outskirts of town, pooling their savings just to afford the rent. The space was sparse, the furniture second-hand. The frigid Danish winter seeped through the thin walls. But it was theirs. They found whatever work they could, doing their best to survive. Julia got a job at a bakery. Sarah cleaned offices. Leah took up babysitting. Some nights they went to bed hungry. But their faith never faltered. Each prayer, every verse of the Quran reminded them why they had chosen this path. Even through hardship, their belief in Allah anchored them. But their father refused to let them go. Not out of love, but to salvage his pride. He began a relentless campaign to force them back. He spread malicious rumors within the community. He threatened legal action to tarnish their names. Worst of all, he began showing up at their apartment. Unannounced, aggressive, unrelenting. Each visit was more gut-wrenching than the last. But they stood their ground. Despite its scarcity, their little apartment had become a sanctuary, a place where they could live honestly and worship freely. They pressed on, juggling jobs and faith, struggling but surviving. The Quran became their refuge, their prayers a source of unshakable strength. Then came the night that shattered the calm. A bitter winter wind howled outside as the sisters huddled together, quietly discussing plans for the next day. The apartment was dim, the heater barely keeping the cold at bay. Suddenly, loud, violent pounding rattled the front door. The noise made Julia's spine stiffen. Sarah's face turned pale. Leah clutched her scarf tightly, her knuckles white. The knocking intensified, furious and relentless. Then a familiar voice roared from the other side. "Open the door!" Julia's breath caught. She recognized that voice. Her father. She hesitated, heart pounding. Before she could react, the door exploded open with a crash. Their father barged in, trailed by several male relatives. Their faces weren't just angry, they were resolute. A chilling sense of determination filled the room. Julia straightened, her voice shaking but defiant. "What do you think you're doing?" Her father didn't answer. "Enough of this foolishness," he thundered. "You've shamed this family long enough. Tonight it ends. You will return to Judaism, or you'll regret every second of this disgrace." The men fanned out through the apartment, their presence overwhelming. One kicked over a chair, another snatched a stack of books and flung them to the floor. Julia's Quran landed with a dull thud, its pages scattering, fluttering like they were crying out for protection. Sarah instinctively lunged forward, gathering it in her arms, holding it close as if shielding it from harm. One of the men stepped toward her, hand outstretched. "Put that down," he barked, his palm raised threateningly. But Sarah didn't flinch. "No," she said firmly, her voice steady in the chaos. "I will not let you take this from me. This is the word of Allah. I believe in it, with all my heart." Her refusal only fueled their rage. Their anger, once verbal, turned physical. Shouts erupted. Insults were hurled like weapons. A man grabbed Julia's arm roughly, yanking her back. Another shoved Leah to the ground. Then the violence escalated. Fists flew, blows landed. The sisters tried to defend themselves, shielding one another, resisting, but they were outnumbered, overpowered. And in the chaos, Julia's voice rose above the turmoil, unbroken. "You can beat us, hurt us, even kill us," Julia cried, "but we will never abandon our faith. We believe in the one true God, and nothing you do can change that." Her words sliced through the chaos like a blade of truth. For a moment, the room froze. The men hesitated, their fury dimming, replaced by something else, doubt, maybe even fear. Julia's father stepped forward, his face twisted in rage. "You think your God will save you?" he scoffed. "You're just foolish girls chasing fairy tales." Just as he raised his hand to strike, something miraculous happened. A powerful gust of wind tore through the room. The windows were shut. The air had been still. And yet the wind came, strong, sudden, and completely unexplainable. Then the Quran in Sarah's hands seemed to emit a soft, radiant glow under the dim light. Its pages fluttered, not randomly, but as if alive. The men stood motionless. Their rage turned to confusion, bewilderment. One man stumbled backward, his lips trembling. "What is this?" he whispered, fear etched into every syllable. Another clutched his chest, his face paling. Julia's father, his arms still raised, let it fall to his side, his gaze fixed on the glowing Quran, breath uneven. Sarah, still holding the sacred book close to her chest, looked up. Her voice was calm, unwavering. "This is the power of Allah," she declared. The room held its breath. "You think you can harm us," she continued, "but our faith protects us. No force can stand against the truth." A heavy silence settled. The men who had charged in with threats and rage now stood frozen, uncertain, shaken, perhaps even afraid. Julia's father slowly took a step back. His lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. Then, finally, he turned to the others. "Let's go," he said. One by one they exited the flat, their fury replaced by a quiet, uneasy submission. No threats, no final warnings, just silence. Julia's father was the last to leave. He lingered, eyes scanning the room. His daughters, the Quran, the evidence of something he could no longer deny. A mix of conflict and something unspoken passed over his face. Then he turned away. The door closed behind him with a soft, echoing click. For a moment, Julia, Sarah, and Leah stood frozen, afraid to breathe, to move. Then the weight of everything came crashing down. They collapsed together on the floor, tears streaming down their cheeks. "Did that really just happen?" Leah whispered, her voice barely audible. Sarah clutched the Quran tightly to her chest, her hands trembling. "It wasn't us," she murmured, her voice brimming with awe. "It was Allah. He showed them His power. He protected us." In the days that followed, word of the event quietly spread through the community. Though their families never acknowledged it openly, the change was obvious. The men who had once stormed their apartment, those who had entered with fire and threats, now avoided them entirely. Even their father, once obsessed with reclaiming them, ceased his campaign completely. It was as if he'd come to terms with something he couldn't comprehend. The fear and resistance gradually dissolved, and in their place came silence. A quiet, unspoken acceptance. Today, Julia, Sarah, and Leah live lives rooted in peace, purpose, and unwavering faith. All three have married Muslim men, gentle, devout partners who respect their journey, who walk beside them with love and conviction. Their days are filled with prayer, study, and gratitude. Julia and Sarah are devoted to memorizing the Quran, cherishing the very words that once shielded them from violence. Leah dedicates herself to community outreach, offering help and guidance to those navigating the path she once walked alone. And often, during quiet moments of reflection, they remember that night. The night everything changed. The miracle that saved them. The moment that sealed their faith. It's a reminder that Allah's power knows no bounds, and that those who remain steadfast in belief will always find His protection. Their journey wasn't easy, but it was worth every hardship. And as Julia finished sharing their story, she whispered a final prayer. "May Allah guide the lost, soften the hearts of those who harbor hate, and bring light to those seeking truth. Ameen."